Another key difference between var, let, and const is going to be the fact that var is only function scope, but let and const are blocked scope. And you can think of blocked scope being anything within the curly braces. And as always, we're going to take a look at some examples just so we understand it more clearly. First, we're going to create some global scope variables. So we go with global scope, and I'm going to set this up as an amount. So I'm going to use var amount is equal to 100. And we already know that any variable that is outside of the function is going to be globally scoped, like so. So we're going to have access to that variable from anywhere within our document, whether that's 1,000 lines down or from some kind of nested function. We're always are going to have access to our variable. However, if we set up a variable within a function, it is only available from within the function. So we're not going to have access to that variable from outside of function. So if we go with function, let's call this greet. And then this function is just going to, I don't know, do some kind of greeting. So we're going to go with console log, and we're going to go with hello there. Then, of course, we need to invoke the function. Let's write greet. And then within the console, I have hello there. So if I'm going to start setting up some kind of variables within a function, I'm only going to have access to those variables from within the function. And I'm just going to go with very random variables. Let's say random. And then this is going to be, I don't know, some random value. And just to show you that from within the function, we're still going to have access to our amount. But from the outside of function, we have no access to a random. I'm going to change this to a template string, like so. And once we change to template string, I'm just going to try to access both of the values. Again, I'm just going to try to access the amount as well as the random. So if I go with amount and then random, you're going to see that I have access to both of them because amount is in the global scope. But if I would want to try to access from the global scope in a local scope, my random one, well, I'm going to have a big fat error. So I'm going to have a random. Let's try to console log it. And of course, what I have here, random is not defined. Why it's not defined? Because we have no access. It is only available within a function. We can do whatever we would want within the function, but from the outside, we cannot access it. And that's the reason why we're going to add here a comment of local scope. So this is going to be our local scope. The difference, though, is going to be if we're trying to do anything within just a simple blocks, because this is where var is going to differ from let and const. And of course, we need to take a look at the example. First of all, we need to comment out the random as well as greet. It's going to stay for your reference, but I would want to keep my console clean. And now let's set up some kind of variable. And I'm going to go with var and total is equal to 8,000. And just before I forget, the same is going to work with let and const. So sorry I didn't mention this, but this is where var, let, and const is going to be exactly the same. So if we're going to change this to let or const, we still have no access to a random. Please keep in mind. But the difference is going to be if we just work with regular blocks. So we have a total. Okay. Then also let's set up some var. Is going to be test, and this is always going to be true. Just so my if condition is true, and then of course I run my block. So I'm going to say if test, of course this is going to be true, and let's just first again console log something, and we're going to go with console log hello there again, and of course it is true. So of course I have my test. All right. Now what do you think is going to happen if I'm going to console log right after the if statement, and if I'm going to check it out, what is happening with my total? So what is the total? Let's imagine, again, 1,000 lines down, I'm checking my total, and I would just want to console log it. So I'm going to say total, and then of course my total is 1,000. First I run hello there, and then I have my 1,000. But what do you think is going to happen if within the if block, I'm going to redefine my variable again? If I'm going to say var total, and let's imagine that within the if statement, I'm calculating something. I don't know, I'm counting the fruits and vegetables. So in this case, my var total is going to be equal to what? what's going to be equal to oranges and onions. Something really random. Now, what do you see here? Well, I see that console log of total right now is in fact a oranges and onions. It is not 1,000. So imagine that if you had some kind of math operation that was relying on the fact that total is going to be a number, more specifically, you are relying on this to be a, let's say, 1,000, then of course you're going to be up for surprise because now you're going to have oranges and onions. And again, we can still access it, of course, from within the block, but that's not the point. The point is that we can easily, from within the if block, change the value. And that is not the behavior that we're looking for. So now, of course, let's test it out and let's try it out the same thing with let. So I'm going to set this equal to a let. Then the same is going to go for the other one. And the same is going to be for the one within the if statement. And now I can see that on line 26, in fact, I'm getting 1,000. Why are we getting 1,000? Well, because this is locally scoped, the same how we had within the function. So if I'm going to change this around, or you know what, let's add some another variable. I'm going to name my variable a value, and again, this is going to be some random value. And now if we save it, and if I try to access the value variable, you're going to see that const and let is going to be blocked scope, where this is a local scope again. So we have no access. That's the reason when we're console logging the total, we're console logging the global variable. We're not console logging the local one. We're not accessing the oranges and onions. And in fact, we're not overriding it as well, but we are just accessing the global variable. And just to show you, of course, if we go with console log, and if we try to console log the value, again, we have value is not defined. Why it's not defined? Because it's not anywhere in our global scope. This is just a local scope. So again, in this case, I'm going to add local scope. So the variables here for let and const are going to be only available within this block. Outside of the block, we have no access to them. What that allows us to do? Well, we don't have to worry about name collisions. You can just simply keep on adding a curly braces like this. And then within these curly braces, I can just start setting up the variables. And variables within the curly braces, let's say the second ones, will have no idea about the ones that we set up with the first ones. So in this case, again, I can go with total. Then total is going to be, I don't know, 100. We can obviously console log it. And of course, we're going to have access to a total. I can do the same thing in my second curly braces, and I'm going to have the same behavior. So in this case, of course, I'm going to have the error for the value. So let's just comment it out and probably let's move it up just so it is sitting closer. But then if, again, I refresh, notice that this is 1,000. Why this is 1,000? Well, because total is still our global variable of 1,000. But anything that we had within the curly braces within our block scope is locally scoped. And that, again, really helps us because we don't need to worry about name collisions. Where with var, if we set anything within the curly braces, in fact, it was globally scoped. And the last thing that I would like to show you in this video, that when using let and const, we have no access to a variable before it has been declared. So let's imagine that we have the amount. If I would want with the var, I could use a console log and I could still access the amount. Now I'm going to get undefined because of course I still haven't set up the value, but even though technically I have no access to a amount, because remember, we're running line by line. So if I would want to access to amount, I would want to run the console log after I have, in fact, declared a variable, and in my case, of course, assign the value. So that way I'm going to get my amount of 100. However, if I move this up, I'm still going to get undefined. The difference is going to be that if we're using let and const, that is not going to be allowed. So if we're going with let and we save it, notice there's going to be a reference error where it says cannot access the amount before it has been initialized. So again, that is going to be the key difference, where with var, we were able to access the variable. Now we didn't get the value, we just got undefined, but still we had access to it. Now in this case, we don't, which of course is again a good thing, because that just prevents us from, again, accessing the variable before we have initialized it. And then lastly, I just would want to mention that everything that we covered as far as a let goes the same for the const. So even though in this video we only use let, please keep in mind we only did that just to save us some time, but the same is going to work for the const as far as the block scope and the initialization is concerned.